This conference will now be recorded.
Oh,
All right, Commissioner, you set?
Is this any better?
Yes, you're good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Great. I can't hear me, but that's okay.
That's okay. It's working here.
Let's jump right in then.
All right.
First of all, I'm so sorry I can't be there because from all reports, it certainly sounds that the conference is going on very, very well. And of course, that's the way we like to have it. Um, so I would like to say, first of all, just welcome to everybody, to all the members of CUC and to all those who are attending, all staff who are interested in what's going on around the state with the Conference of Urban County Issues. So without further ado, there are a couple of changes going on and would like to um, we're going to not go through introductions today because I know that you guys are having just a big time taking care of that on your own. There is a sponsoring introduction of PGAL, which is an international design firm specializing in architecture, interior architecture, engineering, and planning for a diverse portfolio of public and private sector clients. So, would like to welcome PGAL and their support for CUC and all the things that are going on across the state. That all being said, it's always with uh, it's always bittersweet to know when there are board members who will be moving on to bigger and better things. And at this time, there are three members who have served CUC
Commissioner?
very, very well, who
Commissioner?
will be leaving us. Would like to first of all recognize.
Commissioner? Did you just give her the hook? That we lose everybody or just her? Okay. Yeah. Can I do that? All right. So from PGAL here we have Paul Bonnet to say some words about PGAL. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, and thanks, Commissioner, for the introduction. Um, I'm Paul Bonnet with PGAL. As the Commissioner mentioned, we are an international architecture firm. We're based in Houston and started in Houston, but we have 13 offices across the country, 3 in Texas, Houston, Austin, and Dallas-Fort Worth. So I'm here with a couple of my colleagues, Ruben Martinez and Cheryl Gajeski. And it's great to be here in person and seeing a lot of familiar faces, current clients, past clients, and hopefully some future ones. If you haven't met us or I haven't talked to you, please stop by our table out in the front and we can talk to you about the types of projects we do. But most of our work, the vast majority is public work. And we do a lot of county projects across the state of Texas and across the country. A number of different types of projects. It was interesting to to hear the state representative discuss criminal justice. So we do a lot of courthouse projects. While we do want to keep people out of the courts and out of the jails, as your populations are growing, your facilities need to grow also. So we do courthouse projects, jail facilities, juvenile detention, and anything related to criminal justice. We also have a wide range of other project types that we work on, from county precinct facilities, constables' offices, sheriff's offices, and some of the projects we're doing right now include for Fort Bend County, we're about to complete the Emergency Operations Center for the county. Also for Montgomery County, we're doing a forensic science facility and medical examiner's office. So you can see some of those projects in our portfolio and out at the table. And please, if you want to use us as a sounding board for any projects that you're thinking of doing, any things that you, any improvements that your county needs to make, please come and talk to us. And again, thank you very much for allowing us to speak a little bit about our firm and to be a sponsor of this conference. Thank you.
Commissioner Daniel, we get you back?
I can hear you now.
All right, there you go. You're back on.
Is there still the echo?
Nope, we've got that
Wow,
fixed.
wonderful. Well, thank you very much to our sponsor, PGAL. Really appreciate not only all you do every day, but your support of CUC. At this time, I would like to do a presentation of plaques to departing board members. We don't have the plaques just today because they are still en route, but that does not diminish the appreciation to 3 members of our board who are departing. First is Kevin Burns, who has served on the Urban Counties Board since 2012. This year we're recognizing, there he is. We are recognizing his service as immediate past chair of the Urban Counties Board from 2020 through 2021. Prior to serving as chairperson, he served as chairperson-elect and vice chairperson of education. So thank you, Commissioner Burns. Judge Lena Hidalgo is the second person, and Judge Hidalgo joined the Urban Counties Board in 2019. We thank her for her service as Vice Chairperson of Finance. So thank you, Judge Hidalgo. Thirdly is Commissioner Robin Donnelly, who has served on the board since 2019. He previously had served as Vice Chair of Membership Services, and we thank him for his service to the board and membership. So let us now give a round of applause to those members who are moving on to, I'm sure, lots of other kinds of services, and their plaques will be coming. So thank you. Moving along, Secretary's report. Commissioner Justin Rodriguez has.
On his way. And up there, it's just gonna take a second.
All right, howdy everybody. I'm Commissioner Justin Rodriguez from Bexar County. For those that I haven't met, new to the board, very brief Secretary's report under tab 2 or page 2. You'll see the minutes from the meeting of November 18th, 2021. So unless there are any changes, amendments, we'll just need a motion and a second for approval of the minutes. I have a motion. Do I have a second? We have a motion and a second for approval of the minutes from November 18th, 2021. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. And I think that's all of my duties this morning or this afternoon. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Rodriguez. Treasurer's report. That item is also contained in your packet. And Commissioner Andy Myers.
Can y'all all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, great. All right. Your financial reports are on page, starting on page 5 through 13. Brief summary, we have a positive net income of $31,000. We have a net equity of 1.6 million. Our cash and checking and savings exceeds our liabilities. Good thing. And we had a net cash flow of a positive $880,000. There's a brief summary of it there. Anyone have any questions about the financial statement? If not, Madam Chair, I'll move approval of the financial statements and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Is there a second? I think I heard a second there. All those in favor of approving the treasurer's report, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much, Commissioner
Madam
Myers.
Chair, I think that's the sum total of my participation at this thing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Policy and interim charges. Adam Haynes, do you have an update for that on what's going on with the legislature?
Yes, ma'am. Real brief. Basically, the whole conference is about policy, and we've got a lot to do today. So I'm gonna be much more brief than normal. Interim charges are the proverbial due tomorrow, due any day now. We suspect that we will get them, but they are not yet finalized. And so as soon as we get them, we'll get them out and get them to you, and then go from there. But until we have those formally issued by the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor, we're all in a waiting pattern. So unless there are questions, I will get us on down the road because we still got a lot of territory to plow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. It is now time to hear from our invited guest speaker, and it looks like we do have slides up. And our luncheon speaker is Dr. Josephine, or Joe, Luquito, is an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin School of Journalism and Media. She studies cross-platform political communication, focusing especially on the hybrid media ecology, disinformation/propaganda, and social media spaces. Dr. Luquito specializes in broadly mixed methods and computational approaches to studying language. Please help us welcome Dr. Joe Luquito.
Hi, folks. Hopefully you can hear me all right. If not, please let me know.
I can hear you.
So far, so good. As I've been so kindly introduced, my name is Dr. Joe Luquito. I am an assistant professor at UT Austin in the School of Journalism and Media, and I specialize primarily in studying inaccurate information in the media ecology. And so I'm thrilled to be coming here to talk to you today about some of our work, as well as thinking through solutions for combating this sort of misinformation and inaccurate information in the Texas media ecology. And I think this is really important when we think about policy, right? Because in order to persuasively encourage people to promote certain policies, we have to provide meaningful, informative, and accurate information. But we live in a media ecosystem that is rife and full of inaccuracies. And so that's really what I want to focus on today. One quick note, I'm not able to see you as I'm presenting, and so if you do have a question, please feel free to speak up, or you're welcome to save it for the very end. So I want to start with this core belief that I have. I think quality, as I mentioned, quality and accurate information is really important to any community, and that's true whether we're talking about the national community and public sphere, as well as any local community. And as I mentioned, we do live in a political system and a media system that is really full of inaccurate information at this point. And that's something that is deeply concerning to me. And of course, threats to accurate information have always existed for as long as people have communicated with one another. But with the digital era, inaccurate information we have found has spread very, very quickly online. And so we see lots of different examples of inaccurate information spreading online. This includes things like misinformation and disinformation. So for folks who are not aware, misinformation is information that is spread when you believe the information. So you do not realize that it is inaccurate. Whereas disinformation is information that you know is inaccurate and you are sharing it anyway. So if you know that, if you believe very strongly that COVID vaccines do not work and are not effective, that might be inaccurate information, but you believe it. And so that constitutes misinformation. There's also lots of other examples of inaccurate information that isn't necessarily purely accurate or purely inaccurate, but somewhere in the middle. That includes things such as biased information. And then finally, what we're seeing in our research is a rise in conspiracy theories. So beliefs and ideas of kind of overly simplistic explanations of why things are going on in the world. And all of these things are incredibly troubling for our media ecology. They're threats to providing accurate information, right? And so one of the things that I'll be walking through today is talking through how to kind of address and think through these very specific issues with the media ecology. And so I'll talk very briefly about present day challenges in the media ecology. I want to especially focus on local misinformation within Texas. There's a lot of evidence to show that Texas is a particularly vulnerable target of misinformation. And then I'll talk through some of the information vulnerabilities specifically within Texas. And then, of course, the most important question, what can we do about it? So, present day challenges in the media ecology. The first thing I think to really highlight before we even go into talking about challenges is to really just understand the media ecology. And today's modern media ecology is really marked by a lot of variety. This is not the same kind of media system where we had, 3 large national networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. Now there are a whole variety of sources where people can get information, whether that's fact-checked information or not. And so while we do have broadcast and local, national and local broadcast networks and news organizations, we also see a rise in folks getting information from social media platforms and websites, or they go to Google News or news aggregators, right? And so there's a lot of different places where people can get information. Of course, that means that when you think about this variety of media information, there's a lot of different ways for information to reach a large audience. And that includes both accurate and inaccurate information. So you don't need to be part of a national news organization to reach a large audience. You can essentially develop a large audience even on a platform such as Twitter or Facebook or another social media platform. And this results in a really key vulnerability in the media ecology, such that inaccurate information can spread very quickly, sometimes from a social media platform to even more verified or legitimate news organizations. And so one of my specializations in research is to look at how information flows from these social media platforms, sometimes unintentionally, to these larger news organizations. And that's a pattern that I find is incredibly troubling, right? If you see inaccurate information and misinformation flowing from less verifiable sources to sources that should be verifying this information more. There's a lot of sources of inaccurate information within this media ecology, and a lot of these sources of inaccurate information tend to target social media platforms because those platforms have fewer checks on what is accurate and inaccurate information. Of course, I think the most common actors that we think about as sources of inaccurate information tend to be foreign actors and trolls. And so in the past 5 to 10 years, we have seen a real increase in foreign actors and governments trying to target both national and local media ecologies. And that includes Russia as well as China and Iran. Increasingly, we are also seeing a rise of domestic actors spreading misinformation, either in the forms of kind of intentional trolling and making jokes online, or having political actors who are spreading inaccurate information to potentially create leverage for their own beliefs and policies. And then, of course, sometimes there are situations where misinformation and disinformation makes its way to media actors who unintentionally spread it. So, for example, some of my work has shown that a variety of national news organizations unintentionally shared Russian troll tweets thinking that they were American citizens with opinions. And then finally, one really key source of inaccurate information are everyday citizens who believe that they're sharing accurate information but may not realize that it's inaccurate. And all of these sources are important and essentially important to think about because they're all connected with one another in the media ecology. And so anyone, really, when you think about it, can be an amplifier of inaccurate information in this day and age, right? Not most people in our society, in our community now, aren't just passive consumers of information. They talk about it with their friends and their colleagues. They share this information on their own social media platforms. And sometimes that information can be inaccurate. And so one of the things we have to think about is how can we challenge that? One specific type of misinformation and disinformation that I specialize in is trying to identify and detect what are called sock puppets. So sock puppets are a tool primarily used by disinformation actors specifically. So this is a situation where you know the information is false and you are sharing it anyway. And sock puppets refer to fake personas on the internet, often used to spread inaccurate information. So if you are pretending to be someone else online that you are not, that pretend persona is called a sock puppet. And over the past couple of years, we have seen a remarkable rise in the number of sock puppets being used, particularly during elections and highly important political events. And so obviously from 2015 to 2016, as you see here, there was a noticeable increase in the use of sock puppets. In 2016, we saw that primarily from foreign actors, but increasingly as we moved into 2020, we also saw domestic actors using sock puppets. Sock puppets are also related to another type of virtual misinformation and disinformation some of you might be familiar with, and these are social bots. So social bots are slightly different from sock puppets. We define social bots as an automated piece of code that communicates online. So it's not a person necessarily that's a bot, right? This is an automatic piece of code. And rather than producing their own misinformation and inaccurate information, these bots are often used to amplify misinformation. So they themselves don't necessarily produce misinformation, but they often share and amplify misinformation so that an audience member such as myself might think, oh, that piece of information, hundreds of thousands of people have liked it and shared it and retweeted it. But in fact, the majority of them might be bots. And what we're seeing now, especially among foreign actors and foreign disinformation actors, is the use of both sock puppets, so fake personas, and bots simultaneously to make misinformation appear more popular than it actually is. And oftentimes these misinformation and disinformation actors target highly complicated topics. And what we find is that complex topics are especially vulnerable to inaccuracy, right? And so from our perspective, this includes economic information, medicinal and healthcare information, with COVID-19 being a really excellent and tragic example of this, and scientific information. But I'm sure you can see other examples or can think of other examples, especially as it relates to explaining policy and talking through highly complicated things. So when an issue or a topic is really complicated, it becomes really vulnerable to misinformation. And what we find is that false information spreads, sadly, faster than true information. And this is true for a couple of different reasons. The first is that false information provides really simple answers to complicated problems. So rather than thinking through the nuances of a particular economic challenge or a policy challenge, false information can just kind of oversimplify and reduce that problem and propose an accurate solution. Secondly, false information is often very sensational. It really tugs at your heartstrings, or it is highly emotional in nature. Perhaps it makes you especially angry or frustrated, and that information tends to spread faster than accurate information. And then finally, false information encourages in-group, out-group attitudes. So oftentimes false information is really about pointing the finger at perhaps a minority population or an out-group or someone you don't like. And that is in and of itself a form of providing a simple answer, right? And so for all of these reasons, unfortunately, false information just spreads very, very quickly online. And previous work has shown that it spreads faster than true information. And this is as true in national misinformation as well as local misinformation. And what we find is that a lot of research, both in industry as well as in academia, has really focused on national misinformation. But one thing I really wanted to highlight today was the importance of also thinking about local misinformation, because this is something that I think is especially concerning, and we don't have nearly as many resources to combat forms of local misinformation. And within Texas, I am especially concerned about this because Texas is a really popular target for misinformation and disinformation, both by foreign actors as well as by domestic actors. I think this is in part because Texas in and of itself is a very large state. It's a state that has a lot of political significance, both nationally and then of course locally. And then within Texas, there's a really expansive media ecology. We Texans consume a lot of national news information, but we have a really vibrant local media ecology. And of course, there are Texans who are using social media all of the time. And so for all of these reasons, Texas tends to experience higher rates of misinformation and disinformation relative to other states. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of this. So in 2016, there's evidence to show that Texas was a really, really common target for Russian trolls in particular. And one thing that we have found in our research is that Russian trolls were very experienced in doing their research before sending off disinformation. And so one of the things that we had found was that Russian trolls had actually done research and looked into Texas secession endeavors and tried to amplify those sort of messages during the 2016 election, right? And so this is really speaking to using disinformation to tear people apart and to make people more frustrated with one another. And so we see lots of examples of Russian disinformation actors spreading these sort of Texas secession messages. One of those actors that we've studied is this very specific Russian troll. So this is a fake account. This is a sock puppet account from a Russian troll. And they pretended to be a Texan citizen. And the account name on Twitter was South Lone Star. And I apologize for the ugly language here, but I really wanted to emphasize just the roughness, terribleness of the kind of language that this particular fake account was using, really to amplify polarization, to make people hate each other more, and to make people generally more frustrated to talk to one another. And we saw that this fake account, South Lone Star, ultimately received quite a large following. They actually, by the time they were removed by Twitter, they had about 12,000 followers, including many, many individuals who identified as Texans on their own social media profiles. And so these disinformation actors can reach very, very large audiences. And one really tricky thing about this sort of disinformation is that when someone is sharing this disinformation, when they know that it's false and they share it to the world, particularly through social media, it can be intentionally picked up by other genuine actors and treated as misinformation. So this particular fake account, South Lone Star, may have shared disinformation. And if there was a local Texan who saw that message and believed it and shared it themselves, that misinformation or disinformation can transform into misinformation, where a genuine Texan is actually sharing inaccurate information that they believe to be true. And just as disinformation can spread very easily online, misinformation can also spread very easily online. And it has these really important and damaging local offline consequences. And so that's one thing that our work has also emphasized. This online disinformation and misinformation oftentimes moves into offline action with very troubling consequences. And the local news is rife with examples of misinformation resulting in offline damage. So, for example, there was a San Antonio man who was sentenced to federal prison for a hoax about licking a bunch of things when he had COVID. He didn't actually do this, but he was spreading a lot of fake information online that he had COVID and he didn't care, and he was just licking things nonstop. And so these sort of things create a real panic, right? People are obviously very naturally concerned about getting COVID, and unfortunately can lead to a lot of damage and harm. And even from presumably trustworthy sources, we think, there are good sources of information, either offline and online, but sometimes they too can unintentionally or intentionally spread inaccurate information. And so recently there was actually a doctor who was spreading misinformation about COVID-19, and in particular about COVID-19 vaccines and solutions. And that doctor ended up resigning because of the misinformation that they were providing. And so these sort of forms of local misinformation can be incredibly damaging, especially when you think about these topics such as healthcare and medical information. Within Texas in particular, we also see a lot of Spanish misinformation, and this is an area that is really troubling to me because we have fewer resources to combat non-English misinformation. And so here are two examples of stories where misinformation, specifically in Spanish, it ends up being spread on platforms such as WhatsApp, as well as Facebook and Twitter. And it's really creating a problem, as you see on the right, when it comes to these offline solutions like providing COVID vaccine efforts to Latinx and Hispanic communities. And so we do see, again, this difficulty in misinformation spreading online and having these tragic offline consequences. And as I mentioned, previous research shows that there are fewer resources for combating misinformation that is not in English. And so whereas there are plenty of resources to either remove inaccurate information in English on Facebook, there are far fewer of those for Spanish or non-English languages. In Texas in particular, our work suggests that there's a couple of different points or issues that disinformation and misinformation actors tend to target. And so Texas misinformation and disinformation tends to promote really extreme and polarizing beliefs about important local issues. The Texas secession issue is a good example of that. Like national news, it also tends to exploit this tribalism and in-group and out-group. Thirdly, it provides a lot of easy solutions to complex problems. This is something we saw a lot with South Lone Star. So not only was this fake Russian troll account sharing inaccurate information, but it would almost always come with some sort of extremist solution, like we just need to secede from the country or something like that. That's really outlandish. And then finally, as I mentioned, information and misinformation can often come from local, national, and even foreign sources. And so in thinking through who these actors are, one thing that I wanted to kind of touch upon is where they target in the media ecology. So knowing that there are misinformation and disinformation actors in the media ecology, what points do they hit at, and what is especially vulnerable in our media ecology? And I describe a media ecology as kind of the whole part and parcel of social media, news media, any place that you can actually get information from. And despite the abundance of ways to communicate and to get information online, getting accurate, relevant information is, as I've noted, increasingly difficult, right? There's a lot of information out there, and what we're finding is that there are fewer people and resources to sift through that. We noticed that in particular in the journalism industry, there's a lot of newsrooms that are closing down, especially during the COVID pandemic when resources are really tight. And that makes it really difficult to share accurate and quality information that citizens can actually make use of. So I'm going to point to 4 different things that make our media ecology here in Texas particularly vulnerable. News deserts, diminishing local news in both urban and rural communities, crisis situations, and then finally online and offline coordination. So when I'm talking about newsrooms, I'm really speaking to, or yes, sorry, when I'm talking about news deserts, I'm really speaking to places in which there are not a lot of news outlets that are covering that local community. And so what we're finding across Texas is that when there are counties and areas that are losing newsrooms, those spaces are actually being replaced by inaccurate social media platforms. And so here's a story that a journalist had published in Texas Monthly about a Southwest Texas paper that had folded. The newsroom had closed down. And what he had found was that the individuals who relied on that paper for information started turning to inaccurate social media spaces that promoted conspiracy theories and inaccurate information. And unfortunately, over time, as I've noted, there are fewer and fewer resources to cover local news. And in addition to newsrooms closing, we also find that local newsrooms and outlets are being bought out by national companies. So perhaps the newsroom was locally owned at one point and then got purchased by a company such as Gannett, which is a national news organization that owns USA Today. And under these circumstances, these local news outlets actually start producing a lot more national news. And so what we're finding is that folks have they have less knowledge and information about what's going on locally because so much of what they're consuming is actually national news. As I mentioned, COVID-19 has really exacerbated these issues. The local newsroom ecology has really struggled over the past 10 to 20 years, especially with the rise of the internet. And COVID-19 has made that struggle so much worse because the cost of producing this information is much higher, and the cost of doing this sort of journalism has become more difficult. And then finally, and importantly, people in general are also just turning more to national news as opposed to local news. And so some really excellent survey work done by the Pew Research Center and others have found that increasingly, and especially among younger populations, people are really turning more towards national news outlets and national news sources. And by extension, they know less about their local world. This is really problematic, I think, when we think about crisis situations in particular, right? And as I mentioned, crisis situations are really vulnerable to misinformation, partly because they're so complex in nature. And we also saw this during the Texas winter storm last year. There's a lot of misinformation that came out, particularly during that moment, because it was a crisis situation. And during crisis situations, most folks don't have all the information, right? Like when COVID-19 pandemic started and everything shut down, we didn't know all of the details of how COVID worked or whether a vaccine would be possible or not. And because we don't have this information, because people are still doing research, that really creates this vulnerability, this kind of empty gap that can be very, very quickly and easily filled by misinformation. We describe those gaps as data voids. And so the term data void specifically refers to a situation where if you are going on Google and you're looking up that word, it turns up very few results. And so crisis situations in particular produce data voids because when a crisis happens, people don't necessarily know what's going on. They might not have information, or information has not gotten out very quickly yet. And that makes it really, really vulnerable to misinformation. And so it is absolutely essential to fill that data void with good information, even if what we're saying is that we don't know necessarily what that is. And to give you a really good example, this is a Wikipedia page from 2020. So if you notice in the upper right-hand corner, this Wikipedia page was actually written early on during the COVID-19 pandemic, when there was no vaccine at the time. If you go to the Wikipedia page now, this has been revised, obviously, but at the time in 2020, we didn't have a lot of information about the COVID-19 vaccine. And yet people were constantly Googling and looking up and trying to find information about the vaccine. And so without a page like this that is saying that, there's a hypothetical vaccine out there, when people were looking up the COVID-19 vaccine in 2020, they might have been directed to a whole variety of inaccurate information about fake solutions and things that hypothetically could have worked, like hydroxychloroquine or something like that. And that would have been a really dangerous data void were it not for Wikipedia and other platforms providing quality information that vaccines have not come out yet and had not been developed as of April 2020. And so there are really important ways where we can fill in data voids, even if what we're filling it in with is the fact that we don't have all the information yet. And then finally, especially over the past year from 2020 to 2021, what we're seeing is that a lot of online misinformation is now transitioning into offline action. And this is especially true when individuals who are spreading misinformation online are forced off of those platforms. Oftentimes, this is called deplatforming, when a misinformation spreader is removed from a social media platform because of their inaccuracies. But these individuals do not go away. Just because they're not on Facebook or they're not on Twitter doesn't mean that they disappear, right? And so what we're finding is that instead of them not just going to another social media platform, we're actually seeing them start to strategize and communicate offline. And a really good example of this is a particular conference that I've been studying. It's called the Patriot Voice. It's organized by a group of individuals who have been deplatformed from Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms. And because they were no longer able to communicate on these platforms, they started to organize these offline conferences. The first of which was in Dallas this past year in 2021, and it was called the Patriot Voice. And through these kind of offline conferences, they have been able to strategize, talk about future events, discuss tragically the viability of another coup. And all of this is done offline. It's no longer really done online, which makes it really hard to track, right? And so this is one thing that I've become really cognizant of, is trying to find ways to track and understand these communities, because they're still organizing and they're still strategizing, and some could potentially be quite dangerous for our society as a whole, but because they've moved from online to offline platforms, they're much more difficult to track as a whole. And this leads to the I think for me, the most important part, as I mentioned, of my presentation is really thinking through how we can combat this misinformation, right? It's good to know that this information exists, and it's important to know how to detect and identify these bad actors. But most importantly, I think it's essential to figure out how we can remove this content and fill it with quality content. And when I think about how we combat inaccurate information, I argue that we need multiple solutions. We're not going to find a silver bullet that just gets rid of misinformation and disinformation on social media forever. What it's going to take is a couple of different plans and a couple of different solutions that work together to diminish the amount of misinformation in our media ecology. And I point to three really big potential solutions. So the first are media literacy programs. The second is providing quality information. And then finally, the third is debunking inaccurate information. So when I talk about media literacy, I'm really talking about giving citizens and individuals the resources to themselves be able to sift through quality and not quality information. The first, I think most importantly, is to support local journalistic endeavors. I've mentioned repeatedly in this presentation that local newsrooms are really struggling financially and in terms of actually conducting journalistic research, and support both financially as well as in terms of coverage and giving access to them, I think is really important to making sure that these local newsrooms stay rich with information and stay connected to their communities. Another really important place where citizens can get media literacy information are libraries. And I think libraries are really, really important public institutions, but in particular for media literacy, a lot of media literacy programs are actually conducted in libraries. That information can be shared to not just students or not just certain demographics and populations, but a community as a whole. And in general, I think both local newsrooms and libraries could always benefit from financial and political support for developing these media literacy education programs for, as I mentioned, a variety of demographics and individuals in multiple languages. The second point that I made was the importance of providing quality information, right? And so when we are trying to remove inaccurate information, that gap has to be filled with good and quality information. That could include providing websites and resources, particularly when you know that there is a event or something that is going to invite misinformation. So for example, during elections, there is a lot of misinformation that can very quickly spread, particularly as we get close to an election date. And so knowing that elections tend to breed misinformation, we can preempt that by providing information on our websites, for example, about how vote counting occurs or how ballots are protected. This sort of information, when provided online, can really help out individuals who are looking for it and may otherwise not have a good source of information. Another really important source of quality information to me is social media engagement. And I think that folks tend to, I don't know if I'd necessarily say struggle, but social media can have, both positive and negative consequences. But I think social media in and of itself is really important for engaging with citizens and talking and making sure that it's not a one-way form of communication, right? And so I think using social media as a place to provide quality information is really, really important. And then finally, amplifying quality information from local sources specifically. I've mentioned a couple times now that a lot of folks are getting information from national news sources and national outlets and national misinformation actors. And so I think it's really important for all of us to continue to amplify information from local sources specifically and to always bring it back to the community within Texas. This includes providing not just English resources, but also non-English resources. And in particular, I think there needs to be more support given to fact-checking resources and resources that combat misinformation, specifically in Spanish and other non-English languages. And so I think it's really important when folks are developing, for example, media literacy resources in English, there should be translation work that's also done to make sure those resources are available in Spanish and in other languages. And this is true for your websites, this is true for media literacy programs, and this is also true for social media, right? And so one thing that I've been working with social media companies on is to try to figure out how to provide non-English resources. So when there is a fact check for COVID-19, it's not just done in English, it should be done in the native language of the user. And then, of course, building relationships with local diaspora communities to identify the vulnerabilities of that community and to see what sort of specific resources and information can be most beneficial for those local communities. And I think with any resource in general, talking to the local community is really important to figure out what are the most meaningful and beneficial resources for that community. And then finally, in addition to media literacy programs and providing quality information, there will always be a need to combat incorrect information. And whenever I talk to aspiring student journalists or local journalists about how to combat information, one thing that they always mention to me is their concern of, if I'm sharing inaccurate information in an attempt to debunk it, will I unintentionally amplify that misinformation that I'm trying to combat? And so one potential solution for this is to use what I call as the truth sandwich. And so if you are trying to debunk an inaccurate piece of information, the best way to do this is to sandwich it between two truthful statements. So you provide some context in your first truthful statement, mention this factually incorrect statement, and then correct it at the end. And generally, when you sandwich the factually incorrect information in between two truthful sentences, you're essentially providing context that will ensure that that false information is not treated as false, right? Because you're sandwiching it between the truth. I think it's really important to call out individuals who repeatedly share incorrect information. And so going back to my previous comment about deplatforming, previous research has shown that when individuals who repeatedly share incorrect information are deplatformed and removed, that tends to increase the quality of information in the broader media ecology. And there have been plenty of examples, especially in early 2020, where when individuals were removed from the media ecology, particularly from Twitter and other large platforms, that there was just generally fewer misinformation about election fraud or COVID-19. A lot of that misinformation actually disappeared because the individuals who shared them were removed from those platforms. And then finally, reporting and flagging content, I think, is something really important that all of us can do. And most social media platforms provide some sort of feature to report and flag incorrect information. And I have done this myself when I have, for example, found Russian trolls or accounts that I have thought to be Russian trolls. I will report them on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever the relevant social media platform is. And then finally, in thinking through how to debunk and provide context for inaccurate information, I think oftentimes whenever we're talking about inaccurate information or individuals who share inaccurate information, we tend to emphasize a lot of the factual components. They say, no, you're wrong, here's the right information. And I think in thinking through the context of that, it's really important to remember, because misinformation is very emotionally laden, providing a fact-only solution or debunking only with facts tends to feel very clinical. It tends to not be emotional or conscious in nature. And so if you are engaging in the process of debunking misinformation or incorrect information, it's always important to be mindful and kind and think through, why someone might have shared that incorrect information to begin with, and to debunk it kindly and respectfully. In conclusion, I think in general, misinformation is something that will always be a part of the media ecology. We're never going to be able to get rid of it. It has persisted for long before the internet has existed, and it will for as long as we share information and communicate as humans. There will always be misinformation in the media ecology. And so we can't get rid of false information altogether, but we can build resources, programs, and tools that diminish the effect of misinformation and provide quality information for citizens in Texas and around the country. So that is my presentation. I thank you sincerely for listening to me and thinking through these challenging media ecology questions with me. And if you have any questions at all, I will start fielding questions at this point. You're also welcome to reach out to me either on Twitter, or I have also provided my email here below. It's jlukito@utexas.edu. Thank you.
Is there anybody present with us that has questions?
Orientation to the agenda, Director of Transportation report, Mr. Morris.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Excuse me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lukito, for that presentation. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This is difficult. Anyway, very, very useful information, and thank you very much for doing that. At this time, if Gabriela Villarreal would talk about the policy committee elections that will occur immediately upon adjournment.
So obviously I'm not Gabriela, but I'm going to explain the policy elections that we have. So that the way our policy committee is comprised, the big counties, those over 400,000 in population, automatically have seats on the policy committee. The mid-size between 200 and 400, and the small, those under 200,000, are broken into groups, and they have elections to fill their seats. Board members automatically take the seat from the appropriate group of counties from which they come. But we don't have board members on now from A and B counties to fill up all those seats. So we have vacancies, and we handle that through an election every 2 years. And so because of requirements about how elections are conducted in the bylaws, it's going to be a little bit of a process. So let me explain what's going to happen. As soon as we're done here, and this should be our last item for the luncheon, Group B counties, small counties, are going to go right out in the hall and meet with Wendy. Group A counties are going to go upstairs into Reveille, the meeting room Reveille upstairs, and that's where you're going to have your election meeting. So you're all sitting there wondering, Well, who's an A and who's a B? So let me tell you right now. So Group A going upstairs to Reveille, and those of you online, don't leave yet because you're from one of those counties. If you're a county judge or a county commissioner or a designated proxy, we know there are 3 proxies. We're going to have information for you about how to join your meeting. Okay, so Group A counties going upstairs to Reveille: Bell, Brazoria, Brazos, Galveston, Hayes, Jefferson, Lubbock, McLennan, Nueces, Smith, and Webb. You're upstairs in Reveille. Group B counties, right outside the hall, meeting with Wendy: Chambers, Comal, Grayson, Johnson, Kaufman, Midland, Potter, Randall, Rockwall, San Patricio, and Wise. Now, in order to get those of you who are attending virtually linked into your appropriate meeting, I need to take roll of those of you online. And then what's going to happen is we're going to send you an email with a new GoToMeeting link. So you're going to drop off the conference and you're going to follow this link to the election meeting. And then we'll give you further instructions from there. If you're from a big county and you're online, or if you're from a big county and you're present now, once we break, we don't need you back until 2 o'clock. Okay, you're done. So at this point, I'm going to take roll. I'm going to start with the Group A counties. And if you're online, just speak up. Let me know you're here. We've got a list of all of our members, and we're going to check you off as you announce yourselves. Okay? So I'm going to start with Bell County. Anybody online from Bell? Brazoria. Brazos. Galveston. Hayes. Jefferson. Lubbock. McLennan.
Jim Smith, McLennan County.
Thank you, sir.
LaTrinda Reed, McLennan County.
Thank you. Got those?
Chrissy Brought, McLennan County.
Thank you. Is that all from McLennan? 3 of you, that's pretty good. Nueces County.
Barbara Canales, Nueces County.
Thank you, Judge. Anybody else from Nueces on the line? Smith County. Webb County. Okay, that's it for Group A. All right, we're going on to Group B counties. Chambers County. Comal County. Grayson. Johnson. Kaufman County. Midland County.
Robin Donnelly.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else from Midland? I know Randy Prude was on earlier. No? Okay. Potter County. Randall County. Rockwall. San Patricio. And Wise.
J.D. Clark, Wise County.
Thank you, Judge. Appreciate that. Okay, that's all we got. Is there anybody on the line that I missed from an A or B?
This is Major. You guys are breaking up. I apologize. I'm on the line, and I'm here. I apologize for maybe I was muted. I apologize.
That's good. We got you now.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Suzanne Nimmer, McLennan County.
Say that again, please.
Suzanne Nimmer, McLennan County.
Commissioner Ramsey from Midland County, we see you're on the line. Do you intend to participate in the elections? You might be on mute. Do you see Commissioner Prude online? He was on earlier. No? Okay, we'll send the link to Commissioner Ramsey, please. All right, anybody else? I think we have the proxies.
John, sorry to interrupt. This is Eddie Trevino. You may have mentioned me and I missed it earlier.
No, I didn't mention you because
Okay.
you've got a seat. You're already sitting on the policy committee.
All right. Just making sure.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Ladies, y'all set? Okay. Commissioner Daniel, you want to wrap up our luncheon? And then we'll break for policy elections. Commissioner, I think you're still muted.
Regardless if we're in person or remote.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Everyone's got their marching orders on that then. Is there any new business to come before this meeting? I don't see anything. I don't see any hands raised. So I would now offer that we will be adjourning this meeting at 1:19. I give you a few minutes back of your lives. And then the Future of Texas will be meeting at 2 p.m. in the room that most of you are in. It's been a pleasure being here. Look forward to seeing you in person the next time. Thank you very much to everyone for all that you're doing.
Thank you.
Be the force be with you. Bye-bye.